Couch Cage Side with your host, Kyle Delaney for CouchFire.co. In this installment, I would like to break down the whole top contender picture in the lightweight division. Now, there's a lot of controversy. There's just a lot of questions being asked now. Obviously, Ben Henderson's the new champion. Congrats to him. Put forth a great fight against Frankie Edgar, the undisputed champion. But now there's a lot of questions in what direction does the lightweight division go at the top. And there's a lot of good fighters who can really put forth a good effort. Now, there's the possibility of Frankie Edgar getting a rematch. There's a possibility of Anthony Pettis rematching Ben Henderson from the WEC days. Then you have the winner of Nate Diaz versus Jim Miller. And there's a lot of different possibilities. And each fight and each fighter has at least some sort of good argument to go with it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to really break down each scenario. Now, there's a couple things that go into this. Is that there's been a logjam at the top of the lightweight division now for years. Okay, we had a rematch between BJ Penn and Frankie Edgar. There was 2 fights between them. Then there was the rematch between Gray Maynard and Frankie Edgar. And then you finally get this title shot for Ben Henderson. Someone new finally comes into the picture and defeats the undisputed champion. And you're left to question, really, who does get the next shot? And there's a lot of things that also go into this, too, is that the lightweight division has changed a lot since this logjam has happened. There's been a influx of talent. There's been the WEC fighters coming over. There's been fighters dropping down from different divisions. And then there's been the fighters that have always been there, that have always proved themselves, are finally starting to make a case for themselves. So there is a lot going on, and really it has to do with the division changing. It has to do with the lightweight division, the UFC, being the most stacked and most talented, deep, and rich division in all of MMA and all of the UFC. It is the most stacked division. So there is a lot of issues, and really there is a couple guys who are qualified to fight for the next title fight. So plenty of people are going to prove themselves. I'm just going to break down each scenario. So that's just what I have for that. So the first thing I'm going to go with, the first scenario, it'll be Frankie Edgar. Now here's the thing. Frankie Edgar does have a legitimate reason on why he should get a title fight next, because one thing I will say is that if this fight, Ben Henderson versus Frankie Edgar, happened a year ago, most likely would have gotten a rematch. But like I said, the division has changed. It is deeper, it is more talented, and there's a lot more fighters there now. It is a lot deeper division, and it would be a different story if this happened a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago. That's not the case. It is now. Okay, we're in the now, and there is a lot of fighters who can also have the fight. Maybe people just want to see a change at the top. We've seen Frankie Edgar defend his title. We've seen him at the top a lot. And there's also this whole idea that, you know, Dana White and Zuffa and the Fertittas, they made it very clear that they want Frankie Edgar to drop down and face Jose Aldo. And it would be a great fight. But, you know, it's kind of a slap in the face. You know, I mean, Frankie Edgar loses his title and immediately it's asked if you're dropping down to 145. You know, he was at top of the division. He loses once. And you're saying, drop down, face Jose Aldo. Well, he was top of the division. He was king of the division. He was undisputed champion of the division. Now it's, oh, well, you're old news. You got to drop down. So one can understand, really, why Frankie Edgar's upset. And then he comes out the other day and says he wants his rematch. People have come and got hit rematches against him multiple times. And it seems like a home run. You know, you do Edgar versus Ben Henderson 2, and you're going to get a good fight. It's guaranteed fireworks. Both guys bring the fight. So it would be a card and a fight that would sell. But there's also a couple other fighters that are really worthy of this fight. A lot of people have been coming out. You know, Dana White came out and said that Anthony Pettis, okay, the former WEC champion, the only guy really to defeat Ben Henderson handedly, or not even handedly, just to defeat Ben Henderson really in his prime. You know, when he really started to get his game together. And Anthony Pettis is an elite striker. He brings a lot to the table. Really, he's a balanced fighter off his back. He can submit fighters. And you know, the whole point is that it's a fight that really can be sold, and people would want to see it because, you know, everybody knows about the infamous kick off the cage, and Ben Henderson, you know, fought through it, and it was an entertaining fight. And yes, Anthony Pettis versus Ben Henderson would be an exceptional fight that people would want to see. There's no doubting that. But the real question is that does Anthony Pettis deserve this title shot now? There is no question that this fight would sell. There's no question that people would tune in for this fight. There's no question that this fight would be an amazing fight. But the question is, has Anthony Pettis paid his dues? He's 2-1 in the UFC. He had a lackluster performance against Jeremy Stephens. He's lost to Clay Guida, who was beaten pretty handedly by Ben Henderson. And, you know, he had an exceptional fight against Joe Lozon. He finished him early, and Anthony Pettis continues to evolve as a fighter and become a better mixed martial artist. Obviously, both Ben Henderson and Anthony Pettis have improved since their last fight, but there's also the whole hook that Anthony Pettis is one of the last guys to beat Ben Henderson. So there's that whole story behind that. You know, we'll go back to WC rematch, one of the greatest fights in the WC, one of the greatest fights of that year. So there is that whole side of that story. Now, Anthony Pettis could get a title shot. Personally, in my opinion, I mean, in the end, they're going to do what they're going to do. You know, Anthony Pettis, they think he's going to get that title shot next. But here's another scenario, I think. Ben Henderson's at the top of the division. Frankie Edgar wants his rematch. Anthony Pettis wants his rematch against Ben Henderson, wants that title shot. You know, there's a possibility that, you know, Frankie Edgar and Anthony Pettis fight right for top contender. That's definitely a fight that would make a lot of sense. It's definitely a fight that would prove who's top contender. You know, and I say that Anthony Pettis needs to prove himself. This would be a fight to prove himself. You're going to fight against a guy who's defended his belt multiple times, against some of the best in the world. So I think that's a good scenario. Or, you know, Frankie Edgar gets the rematch, or Anthony Pettis gets his rematch and gets his title shot. So there's a couple scenarios. Personally, I think, you know, an Edgar versus Pettis fight would be great. I think any scenario would be great. Every single one of these fights would be good. Now, there's two other fighters really that can be added to this scenario as well, and that is the winner of the fight of Nate Diaz versus Jim Miller. Now, these are the two guys. One, a fighter who's dropped down from the welterweight division to lightweight. Since then, he's won 2 fights. That's Nate Diaz, defeat Takanori Gomi, impressive fashion, came out, made quick work of him. Then he comes out against Donald Cerrone and beats him to an oblivion, a one-sided affair, showing exceptional boxing, and the fight never made it to the ground because of respect to Nate Diaz's incredible jiu-jitsu game. Then you have Jim Miller, the guy who's always been there. He's won 8 fights out of his last 9 fights. His only loss coming to Ben Henderson. And you know what? It was a good fight. You could say Ben Henderson was, it was really a one-sided affair, but Jim Miller showed incredible toughness. And let's just be clear is that Jim Miller had a kidney infection. Jim Miller had mono at that time, found out really he wasn't fit to fight after the fight. And he was never finished during that fight with Ben Henderson after taking an absolute beating. But he also did give a couple good strikes to Ben Henderson in that fight. And he also did lock in a couple tight submissions. One could only imagine if we had a healthy Jim Miller. Now, I'm not one to make excuses for this. Jim Miller was sick. You know, whether he should have fought or not, you know, it was a good fight. But, you know, I think it's going to be a different fight the other time around. And you know what? Nate Diaz has always struggled with wrestlers, Ben Henderson being a good wrestler. But, you know, Nate Diaz has continued to really improve as a mixed martial artist over the years. You know, Nate Diaz definitely deserves a shot as well. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with these two fighters, what happens with the winner of this fight. But both fighters, whoever wins this fight, is definitely capable of receiving that title fight against Ben Henderson or whoever is the top of the division at that time. It just depends on what way, you know, the division goes. Now, here's what I think in regards to everything. I've said the possible scenarios. I think what makes most sense, you know, this is coming. I'm a Frankie Edgar fan. I think a rematch makes sense. It was a good fight. It will definitely sell. I think a rematch would be, you know, really the respectful thing to do. It would really be, and it's not even respectful. It would be a good fight. It would be guaranteed fireworks. Also, if that doesn't happen, you know, Anthony Pettis gets the title fight. I don't think that's the right thing to do, but it will be a good fight. But what makes the most sense, if you're not going to give Frankie Edgar the rematch, instead of giving Pettis that title fight, I say make Edgar and Pettis fight for the right to top contender. And really, that person gets Ben Henderson next. Of course, this would mean that we'd have to wait for that fight to happen. Then we'd have to wait for that training camp for the winner of that fight to go against Ben Henderson. So that gives you the possibility of whether Nate Diaz and the winner, Nate Diaz and Jim Miller, would get the title fight. So there's plenty of scenarios. That's really me just debunking it, and there's definitely big possibilities. Either way, I think the way to look at it is, in the end, it's going to be what it's going to be. There's definitely those possibilities. But the good thing is that all these fights, all these possibilities, they're exciting fights. Not one single one of these possibilities or options is going to be a bad fight. And really, we should all look forward to it as fans. But you know what? In the end, I'm looking forward to this year that we have coming up in the lightweight division. There's going to be a lot of good fights. And you know what? We might have a new champion, or Ben Henderson might just be an undisputed champion by the end of this year and defend his belt. So it's going to be what it's going to be. There are possibilities. There are different scenarios. In the end, it's going to pan out however it's going to pan out. The people from above, Zuffa, Dana White, are going to do what they want to do. But these are the possibilities. And really, as fans, we should look forward to this upcoming year of all these great fights. Nate Diaz and Jim Miller is going to be an epic fight. And, you know, whatever they do with Edgar, Pettis, and Bendo, that whole possibility, they're all going to be good fights. So in the end, as fans, we should look forward to this upcoming year in the lightweight division. And those are the possibilities, I think, for the top contenders in the lightweight division. So that's what I have for this edition. The Cage Side Couch. This is Kyle Delaney signing off. I'm out of here.